You think she left because she stopped caring, but the truth is, she left because she never had to care. And the moment you disappeared, she finally understood exactly what she had been holding without ever weighing it. That is the sentence nobody said to you when it ended. That is the thing that was true the whole time and is only becoming visible to her now that you are gone. And the question is not whether she will realize it. The question is what you are doing with yourself while she does. Most men who get taken for granted are not weak men. Let me say that clearly from the start, because the narrative you have been fed is exactly backwards. The men who get taken for granted are, more often than not, the men who gave the most. The men who showed up consistently, who were reliable in a world full of unreliable people, who loved with intention and patience and a kind of steady depth that most people only recognize as rare when it is no longer in the room. You were not taken for granted because you were too little. You were taken for granted because your consistency was so dependable that it became invisible, like oxygen. Nobody thinks about oxygen until it is gone, and nobody thinks about the man who was always there until the day he decides to stop being there. Here is what it really means when a woman finally realizes the value of the man she took for granted. Here is the psychology underneath the moment, the mechanism that makes it happen, the truth about why it unfolds the way it does. And more importantly, here is what that realization means for you and what you are supposed to do with it. Before we go deeper, if you are watching this right now and something in those first few sentences already felt familiar, if you recognized yourself in that description, subscribe immediately. Not for me, for you. Because what I am about to tell you is the kind of information that the noise of daily life will try to drown out the moment you close this video. You need this channel as a recurring anchor. You need a place that will keep telling you the truth when the world keeps offering you comfortable stories. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and stay close. You will thank yourself later. Now, let's build this from the ground up. The misconception is that being taken for granted is a reflection of your value. That if she didn't fully appreciate you, it must mean you weren't fully worth appreciating. That the failure of her perception is somehow evidence of a failure in you. You have been carrying that interpretation like a weight on your chest, using it to explain why things went wrong, using it to decide how much you should invest next time, using it to quietly shrink the size of the man you are willing to be in a relationship. You told yourself that if you had been more exciting, less available, more unpredictable, then maybe she would have seen you differently. That interpretation is wrong, and it is doing damage. Here is the hard truth. Being taken for granted has nothing to do with your deficiency and everything to do with human psychology's relationship to abundance. People, all people, not just women, not just romantic partners, all people devalue what is consistently available. This is not a character flaw unique to the person who hurt you. It is a feature of how the human brain processes value. Scarcity creates urgency. Abundance creates blindness. The thing that is always there becomes part of the furniture. Not because it isn't extraordinary, but because the brain stops registering the extraordinary when it becomes the expected. That's called adaptation. And it is the psychological engine behind almost every story of taking someone for granted that has ever existed. You were not invisible because you were ordinary. You were invisible because you were constant. And there is a devastating difference between those two things that most men never separate. And that inability to separate them is what turns a painful experience into a permanent wound. Now let's talk about why it happens inside her specifically. Because understanding the mechanism is not about excusing the behavior. It is about stripping the story of its power over you. When a woman is with a man who is genuinely good, reliable, present, emotionally available, consistent in his love, and that woman has not yet done the internal work to recognize and honor what real love actually feels like, she will misread his consistency as plainness. She has been conditioned by culture, by movies, by her own previous experiences to associate love with volatility, with the hot and cold, with the chase and the withdrawal, with the high of being wanted and the ache of wondering. She has been taught implicitly and repeatedly that if something doesn't feel like anxiety, it doesn't feel like passion. And so when a genuinely good man loves her calmly and steadily, when there is no game, no uncertainty, no emotional roller coaster to ride, she interprets that stability as a lack of intensity. She mistakes your peace for his limitation. She mistakes your consistency for predictability. She mistakes your love for granted. And then you leave. or you stop performing, or you simply stop making yourself available in the way that you always had. And the silence that follows is the loudest thing she has ever heard. Because now the comparisons begin. Now she goes out and encounters the men who do bring volatility, who do bring the push and pull, who do bring the anxiety dressed up as excitement. And she feels the high and she feels the crash. And somewhere in the middle of that crash, somewhere in the 2 a.m. moment when he hasn't texted back and she is staring at her ceiling and trying to figure out what she did wrong, she thinks of you not as a fallback, not as a consolation prize, as a contrast, as a standard she didn't know she had until she felt what living without it is like. That's called comparative realization, and it is the thing she will never fully admit, but that will rewrite her understanding of what she lost. Here is what it costs her. Genuinely. Not as revenge fantasy, not as a story you tell yourself to feel better, but as a real psychological consequence that she carries forward. She now has a reference point she cannot erase. Every man she meets will be filtered through what she remembers of you. Not the version of you she was bored by when you were hers, the version of you she reconstructed in her memory once you were gone, because memory is selective. Because once you leave, the mind starts retrieving all the moments it dismissed while they were happening. The coffee you made without being asked, the way you listened without waiting for your turn to speak, the plans you made that actually materialized, the words you said that you meant and then proved, the safety she felt and never named because she didn't know yet that safety was a gift and not a given. She will remember all of it, piece by piece, at the worst possible times, in the middle of bad dates, in the middle of arguments with men who do not have your steadiness, in the middle of nights when she realizes that what she called boring was actually rare, and what she called exciting was actually exhausting. That is the cost. She carries the ghost of who you were, and she carries the knowledge that she had it and chose not to hold it. And that knowledge does not leave quietly. Now here is the reframe. And this is the part that changes everything if you let it. None of what I just described requires you to wait for her. None of it requires her to come back for it to matter. None of it requires her regret as the validation that proves your worth. Because here is the truth that sits underneath all of this. The fact that she will one day understand your value is not the story. The story is whether or not you understand your value right now, today, without her recognition, without her return, without anyone else's assessment of what you are worth. The man who is truly at peace with himself does not need the moment she realizes what she lost. He is already so fully invested in his own becoming that her realization is, at most, a footnote, not a victory, not a vindication, a footnote. Because he is not building himself for her to notice. He is building himself because it is the only thing that is actually his to do. Let me describe that man to you. He is the man who, after the relationship ends, does not collapse into the rubble of it. He grieves because he is human and grief is honest, but he does not build a residence in the grief. He does not refresh her social media looking for signs of her suffering to confirm that he mattered. He does not reach out to remind her of what she had. He does not perform his healing for an audience of people who might tell her how well he is doing. He actually heals, quietly, privately, with the kind of dignity that has no interest in being witnessed. He goes back to himself. He returns to the work he neglected, the goals he softened, the ambitions he quieted because they made her feel left behind. He picks them back up not as a coping mechanism, but as a reclamation. He is not running from the pain. He is running toward the man he was always supposed to be, the one who got a little lost in the relationship, the one who gave too much of himself to the wrong container, the one who is now choosing to pour that energy back into his own foundation. He sets standards for the next time, not walls, standards. He decides from a place of clarity rather than bitterness what he will and will not accept going forward. He decides what consistency he will offer and what consistency he requires in return. He decides that the next woman who enters his life will not receive the best version of him until she has demonstrated through her actions over time and not through the warmth of the beginning that she is capable of recognizing what she has been given. He does not become cold. He becomes clear. There is a profound difference. Cold is the armor of a man who is still wounded. Clear is the posture of a man who has converted the wound into wisdom. He does not shrink his love. He does not decide that because one person failed to appreciate him, love itself is a losing game. He does not punish the next person for what the last person cost him. He stays open, but he stays open from a position of self-knowledge, of earned boundaries, of a man who knows now what he did not know before, that his giving must flow from overflow and never from depletion, and that a relationship that requires him to abandon himself to sustain it is not a relationship. It is a slow surrender. Now let's talk about what you actually do right now, not in the abstract, in practice. Stop monitoring her. Stop checking whether she has watched your stories, liked your posts, reached out, or gone quiet. Every time you check, you are handing her the power to determine your emotional state. You are making her activity the thermostat of your internal climate. Stop. She is not your metric. You are your metric. The only data point that matters right now is whether you are moving forward. Stop rehearsing the conversations you wish you had. Stop writing the perfect response to what she said or didn't say. Stop replaying the moments where you could have done something differently and projecting a different ending onto them. The relationship ended in exactly the way it ended. You can learn from it without living in it. Extract the lesson, close the file, move forward. Redirect everything you were giving to that relationship back into your own life. Every hour you spent thinking about her, strategizing about her, being affected by her, reclaim those hours, reinvest them into your body, your craft, your finances, your friendships, your mind. The man who takes every ounce of energy he poured into a relationship that didn't honor him and pours it back into himself becomes, within months, a version of himself that he did not know was possible. That is not motivation poster language. That is the literal mechanics of what happens when misdirected energy finds its right target. Have one honest conversation with yourself about your patterns, not to punish yourself, to understand yourself. Ask where you learned to make yourself so available that your availability became invisible. Ask when you decided that loving hard and loving silently without expressing your own needs was the way to keep someone. Ask what you were afraid would happen if you had held your standards earlier, if you had said what you needed instead of hoping she would feel it, if you had been willing to risk her comfort for the sake of your own honesty. That conversation, held seriously and without self-judgment, is worth more than a year of distraction. And then begin again, not with her, with yourself. Begin again as the man who knows what he knows now, the man who learned that his consistency is rare and should be treated as rare, the man who learned that real love is not proven by how much you can endure without asking for anything back, the man who learned that the right woman will not need him to disappear before she recognizes what she has. Begin again as that man, not someday, now. You are not the man who got taken for granted. That is not your identity. That was a chapter, one chapter in a story that is still being written by the only person with the authority to write it, which is you. You are the man who loved deeply in a situation that didn't honor that depth, and you walked away, or are walking away, with every bit of that capacity to love intact. You did not become less capable of love. You became more honest about where it deserves to go. You are the answer, not the question, not the lesson someone had to lose to learn. The answer, the complete, whole, developing, increasingly clear answer to the question of what a real man actually is, and the version of you that is coming, the one on the other side of this grief, this rebuilding, this honest reckoning with yourself. That version is going to be so unmistakably, undeniably real that the right person will have no capacity to take him for granted. Not because he will demand appreciation loudly, but because his presence will simply make its own case. She will realize what she lost. That is almost certain. But by the time she does, you will be somewhere she cannot follow. Not out of cruelty, out of growth. You will have become someone so invested in his own becoming that looking backward will feel not like restraint, but like disinterest. Like turning down a road you already know doesn't lead anywhere new. If this spoke to something you needed to hear today, subscribe right now. This channel exists for the men who are ready to stop being comfortable with being invisible and start doing the work of being undeniable. Come back on the hard days. Come back when the grief sits heavy. Come back when the old patterns pull. Come back when you need the voice that will not soften the truth just because the truth is inconvenient. There is a community here of men who are choosing themselves, rebuilding themselves, and refusing to let one painful chapter become the whole story. You belong in that community. You always did. Get in, stay in, and let's build the version of you that nobody takes for granted ever again. Total approximate word count, 2,2600 words.